But along came another company who wanted to take the wind out of those sails.
Odyssey by Magnavox.
Magnavox and Ralph Baer, the inventor of its Odyssey home video game system, thought that Nolan Bushnell's Pong looked amazingly like their ping pong game. And not by chance.
They were able to prove that Nolan Bushnell had gone to a closed Magnavox trade show, that he had in fact even played on an Odyssey.
Sure enough, there in the trade show's guest register was Bushnell's signature. Rather than face a lawsuit that could have ended Atari, Bushnell settled with Magnavox. But now Atari faced competition of its own as scores of other companies began making rip-offs of Pong.
So the way you stay ahead was to invent the next game. So you'd have that for a while until they copied it.
Atari brought out one arcade hit after another. Asteroids. Battle Zone. Lunar Lander. And a game invented by a hippie kid named Steve Jobs. Yes, the Steve Jobs.
He really was out there in left field with very strange ideas about diet and water and air and a few other things.
But the game that Jobs and his pal Steve Wozniak created became one of Atari's biggest hits, Breakout. Within a few years, Jobs and Wozniak would break out of Atari to form a little company called Apple.
And he wanted me to invest. And I could have had a third of Apple Computer for $50,000. I kind of regretted that.
Actually, Bushnell had enough on his plate running Atari. Every moment of his day was dedicated to finding ways to stay ahead of the competition.
Strong piece of stuff.
The answer, he thought, would be a home version of Pong. Unfortunately, no one else seemed to think so.
We went to the toy fair in New York, presented the first Pong, sold none. Zero.
But then the largest retailer in the world in the 1970s came to the rescue. Sears. They put the home version of Pong in their 1975 Christmas catalog. 150,000 home Pong machines were sold just during the holiday season alone.
Once upon a time, you could give a kid a top and a jump rope for Christmas, or perhaps a small doll. Not anymore.
Within a year, there were 75 companies making their own home video game machines. To stay ahead of them, Bushnell had an idea for a state-of-the-art game console that was actually a computer. What he didn't have was the money to manufacture it.
I did a calculation how much it was going to cost me to raise the capital and the uncertainty. And I felt that the best thing to do was to sell the company.
And so, in 1976, Bushnell sold Atari to Warner Communications for $28 million.
We thought Warner Communications understood the hit business, the hit music business, the hit movie business, and would understand that some games don't work and some games do. So that was the choice. At the time, it seemed like a great deal.
At first, everything at Atari was the same. As chairman of the board, Bushnell was still coming up with new ideas. Like a chain of restaurants where kids could play video games. Yes, Nolan Bushnell is also the father of Chuck E. Cheese.
Children the world over are the same. They like fun, food, entertainment, and games.
It was a secret trick to open up new locations to sell more video games, is what that was about. Absolutely brilliant. Worked great. Except the pizza was never very good. Engineers didn't make very good pizza.
But the honeymoon between Warner Communications and Nolan Bushnell ended quicker than you can say pepperoni, especially after Warner brought in a former textile executive named Ray Kassar to keep an eye on its new company. By then, Atari had brought out its new game console, the VCS, also known as the 2600, the machine that was supposed to keep the company on top. But after a slow start, Bushnell lost faith in the VCS and tried to get Warner to drop it.
I basically told them that they were a bunch of idiots, and you don't say that to executives.
So they said, you know, Nolan, we're tired of you. Go away.
In 1979, Warner Communications fired Nolan Bushnell and replaced him with Ray Kassar.
Mr. Kassar was quoted as saying how to handle these engineers. He says, "Oh, I've used to them. I worked at Burlington Industries, and they're just like their product fashion designers, high-strung prima donnas. I know how to handle them. They're a dime a dozen." Well, within a week, we had a T-shirt made that said, "I'm just another high-strung prima donna engineer at Atari."
Atari was only as good as its engineers, the geniuses like Alan Miller and David Crane, who created the hit games that drove earnings. And they thought it was about time they got recognition for their talent.
All the work was done by just one person, all the graphics, all the music, all the sound effects, all the programming.
Our best engineers were getting paid $50,000 a year, and they could see that their work that one guy could make in 3 months was generating $20, $30 million of revenue. And they said, "I want a piece of that action."
Not only did they not get a piece of the action, they hardly got any credit.
What specific games have you designed?
Well, at Atari, we don't really like to talk about who designed what.
Why not?
Well, because we like to make the game the superstar as opposed to the programmer.
Why shouldn't you get credit if you design the game?
Well, because it is a corporate product. Okay, these are games by Atari, not games by Steve Wright or some other person.
One of the guys said, "We can get 4 programmers off the street for the kind of money that you're asking for."
It was the final straw. Alan Miller and his fellow designers quit Atari and started their own company, Activision, to make games that would play on the VCS. In its first year of operation, Activision made a profit of $13 million. Pretty soon, other engineers were also leaving Atari to start their own third-party software companies. The video game boom was on. But in it were the seeds of an even bigger explosion that few, if any, in the industry would survive.
Coming up, a Japanese import storms the U.S.
Pac-Man was on the cover of Mad Magazine and Time Magazine. I mean, Pac-Man was everywhere.
But for the video game industry, trouble was lurking just around the corner. That's next, as Game On continues.
In 1978, just as Americans were starting to buy Hondas and Toyotas, their kids were spending every cent they had on another product from Japan. A dream come true for any kid who saw Star Wars a zillion times and wished that they could be a Jedi warrior too. Space Invaders.
Space Invaders said, "Hey, you want to be Luke Skywalker? Here you go." You had this thumping soundtrack with this heartbeat that would get you more and more excited as you played, and these wonderful spacey sound effects.
Fighting Space Invaders' never-ending onslaught of evil aliens became a Japanese obsession.
They had to increase the number of 100 yen pieces they were minting because so many were inside Space Invaders machines at any one time that they were running out of 100 yen pieces.
The yen to play Space Invaders turned out to be just as great in America. By 1979, there were 60,000 Space Invaders machines in the United States, each making $300 to $400 a week. Midway, the coin-op company that brought Space Invaders to America, had invaded the space of Atari, the industry leader, in a big way. Rather than fight it, Atari CEO Ray Kassar hitched a ride into orbit with the game by licensing the home rights.
Ray was the one who looked at Space Invaders and he said, if we made a Space Invaders cartridge for the VCS, I'll bet you that would sell.
It's a bet Kassar won. Sales of the Atari VCS console doubled. And then Japan invaded again with an even bigger blockbuster, Pac-Man.
When they were making Pac-Man, the guy who was leading the project took his team to lunch. They went for pizza in Tokyo, and somebody had taken the first slice of pizza, and then he looked down and there was Pac-Man staring at him.
I got a pocket full of quarters and I'm headed to the arcade.
Japan had started a global epidemic.
Pac-Man fever.
Pac-Man was on the cover of Mad Magazine and Time Magazine. I mean, Pac-Man was everywhere.
Towels, ties, T-shirts. So we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar business here.
But not every Japanese video game manufacturer was making it big overseas. A playing card company turned toy and game maker named Nintendo just couldn't get off the ground in America. At the time, Howard Lincoln was an attorney for Nintendo's struggling American division.
They had a huge inventory of coin-operated video games, Radar Scope, which was the name of the game, which were not selling.
But what Nintendo also had was Shigeru Miyamoto. Today, he's considered one of the greatest video game designers of all time. But back then, he was a brand new hire, personally discovered by Nintendo's boss, Hiroshi Yamauchi.
Hiroshi Yamauchi looked at him and said, wow, you know, there's something special about this guy. There's some kind of creativity here that I've never seen before. The guy's going to be a force.
Miyamoto started off by creating something that no other video games ever had, a story.
And I thought of, well, if we have a guy who's chasing after a gorilla who's kidnapped a girl as he goes up, then that would be something that would be very fun.
Not only did Miyamoto come up with a wacky game, he also gave it a wacky name, Donkey Kong.
My idea for the name was to have something that essentially meant dumb monkey. And in Japan, the word Kong is very closely associated with gorillas. And so we took that, and I had, from somewhere or someone, heard that in English donkey means dumb. And so actually the name came about perhaps because of my somewhat limited English abilities at the time.
But Donkey Kong's popularity was unlimited. It became the most popular game in the world after Pac-Man, and Nintendo's first hit in America. Donkey Kong, Pac-Man, and Space Invaders ushered in the golden age of video games. By 1981, Americans had dropped 20 billion quarters into arcade machines. But no golden age lasts forever, and this one ended the way it began, with another alien from outer space. The year was 1982. E.T. was the blockbuster movie of the year. Everybody wanted to cash in on the E.T. craze, and the video game industry was no exception.
Hey! Mr. in Television.
Before long, there was Henry Thomas, the young actor from the movie, starring in commercials for Mattel's Intellivision game system. Steve Ross, the head of Atari's parent company Warner Communications, had an even bigger plan for exploiting the extraterrestrials' extraordinary popularity.
He wanted to get Steven Spielberg to come make movies for Warner Brothers instead of just being with Universal, where he was with Jaws and E.T.
Yeah, great. Good. Print that one.
And to show that he could, pardon my language, that he could piss with the big boys, he said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you $25 million for the licensing fee to license E.T. for the Atari VCS.
When Spielberg said okay, Ross ordered Atari to have the game ready by the start of the Christmas shopping season. There was only one problem. That favorite time of year for the kids and their retailers was only 6 weeks away.
And, you know, of course, the game was terrible. It's remembered as one of the worst games of all time, and deservedly so.
On the heels of Atari's worst game came December 7th, 1982.